All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we're going to talk about Martin Luther King Day, a message that has been completely forgotten, it appears, at times. But before we get into that, I want to talk about my sponsor, Fathom the Good. Fathom the Good has a curriculum for 9th and 10th grade. They are expanding beyond that. It is a curriculum that is based in political philosophy, social studies, and is built to inoculate your kids from a very woke world. When you understand the underlying philosophical principles behind the founding of America, you will see the disparity between what we see in our culture today and what was inspired to come to pass in the founding of America. Go to fathomthegood.com, fathomthegood.com. All right, to Martin Luther King Day. Many of you will remember, some of you may have forgotten, some of you may have never known that when Martin Luther King Day was put in place under President Clinton, we removed Washington's birthday and Lincoln's birthday. That was a huge mistake. Now, look, I'm very happy we have Martin Luther King Day, but President's Day now, which is what they did, right? To not add another holiday, they consolidated Washington and Lincoln's birthdays into President's Day, which means absolutely nothing. It means nothing. And we added Martin Luther King Day. Now, Martin Luther King Day is very important. I think it's important for all of us, regardless of our background, our race, political persuasion, etc. Martin Luther King is an American hero. His message was very good. It has been forgotten today. But removing Washington and Lincoln's birthdays, you can almost trace a trend of, that had already started, but a trend of a lack of civic studies and the founding of America in classrooms to that point. It was a huge mistake. We should have, what does Labor Day mean? Labor Day means absolutely nothing. I mean, let's put a Martin Luther King Day in September. Find a reason to do it and put it there and keep Washington and Lincoln's birthdays. Now, to the point of Martin Luther King. Now, to the message of Martin Luther King, which we should be remembering today. Those that are pushing a social justice and woke ideology are pushing very strongly against the message of Martin Luther King, whether they know it or not. Those that founded, for example, critical race theory, pushed very strongly against the message of a civil rights movement because it was founded under the framework of the Constitution. Martin Luther King believed in the Constitution. He just believed that it needed to be applied more to blacks and minorities than it had been, that equal rights actually had to exist. The critical race theorists, those that founded critical race theory, did not believe this. They don't want anything to do with the Constitution, not as it is currently in place. I'll give you an example. This is a book called Critical Race Theory from Richard Delgado and Gene Stefanczyk. They are two of the founding members of critical race theory. You can see here in the highlight here, it says, critical race theory sprang up in the 1970s as a number of lawyers, activists, and legal scholars across the country realized more or less simultaneously that the heady advances of the civil rights era of the 1960s had stalled. That, of course, is the major portion of that. The key icon in that is Martin Luther King. Had stalled and in many respects were being rolled back. This is really the only thing I don't believe when I read those founders and movers and shakers of critical race theory and other critical theory disciplines, anti-racism, intersectionality, etc. It's the only thing I don't believe, right? These are self-proclaimed Marxists. They don't believe in the founding of America. They don't believe in the Constitution. So it's not that they look at civil rights and say, well, this just isn't moving fast enough. No, they already have a worldview and a framework in place. But they push against this. They do not like Martin Luther King's message. They only use it when it is convenient for them or in a discussion if it makes sense for them. You see here again in the same book, as mentioned earlier, critical race scholars are discontented with liberalism as a framework. Now again, liberalism is the political philosophy. It's not the left. It's the political philosophy underlying the West, underlying capitalism and democracy. Liberalism as a framework for addressing American racial problems. Many liberals those that are against hard leftism, believe in colorblindness and neutral principles of constitutional law. They believe in equality, especially equal treatment for all persons. These are founding principles of the United States, regardless of the different histories or current situations. So as you see, they don't believe in this. They don't believe in an equality. They believe in equity. It's very different. The message is very different. Martin Luther King believed in the Constitution. He wanted true equality, not equity, not the diversity, equity, and inclusion that we have today that is so prominent in our institutions. Here's a very recent article in the Free Press with Clarence Jones. Clarence Jones was the co-author of the I Have a Dream speech, right? I have a dream that your children and my children, regardless of their skin colors, will be judged by their character, right? That's equality. That is not critical race theory. That is not anti-racism. That is not the woke world that the peddlers of these ideologies are trying to shove upon us. Here's what Clarence says. Hypothetically, if he was talking to Martin today, he would say, Martin, I'm pissed off at you. I'm angry at you. We should have been more protective of you. We need you. You wouldn't permit what's going on if you were here. That is absolutely correct. He says, we are trying to save the soul of America. He goes on to say, regrettably, some very important parts of Martin Luther King's message, his message, are not being remembered. Radical nonviolence and his eagerness to build allies across ethnic lines. It's the very exact opposite message of critical race theory and intersectionality. It is one of division. And he says, put in a more negative way, King's messages have been forgotten. Another key point is color blindness. Again, not judged by the color of our skin, but by our character. This is something that is completely forgotten in DEI and critical race theory. The gospel of equity wants to bend Martin Luther King's message and fit a square peg into a round hole. The round hole that enters into a bankrupt ideology of social justice. The article goes on to say, and colorblindness, the once aspirational idea of judging people by their character rather than their skin color, which King famously espoused, has fallen out of fashion. Not just out of fashion, it is vehemently pushed back by the religion of academia. The dominant voices, the article says, of today's black rights movement argue that people should be treated differently because of their skin color to make up for the harms of the past. One of America's most prominent black thinkers, Ibram X. Kendi, the face of critical race theory and anti-racism, argues that past discrimination can only be remedied by present discrimination. In other words, reverse racism, or just racism. And then Clarence Jones makes a clear distinction here that I think is very important. He says, look, you don't want to be blind to color. You want to see color. I want to be very aware of color. But, he emphasizes, I just don't want to attach any conditions to equality to color. And the reason is because when you attach those conditions to, as he calls it, equality to color, then you move from equality over to equity, which requires a tyrannical state to force equality. He goes on to say, very astutely, it's possible to read Kendi's prize-winning book, Stamped from the Beginning, that's his first book, and come away believing, and quote, come away believing that America is irredeemably racist beyond redemption. And this is the face of critical race theory and equity and anti-racism. This is what's pushed from the halls of the social sciences department at Brigham Young University to the offices, to the DEI offices of Fortune 500 companies. Jones goes on to say, in regards to that theory, that he vehemently disagrees with it. That would violate, he says, everything that Martin King and I worked for. It would mean it's not possible for white racist people to change. Well, I am telling you something, Jones added. We have empirical evidence that we changed the country. They did change the country. And that is why I say that when the critical theorists, right? The critical race theorists that came in, the crits as they call them, that were so instrumental in providing our woke culture today. They immediately dismissed the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King and what he was trying to do within the framework of the Constitution and equality because they believe in the gospel of equity. They were Marxists, not my interpretation, their own words. They were rooted in Marxism, and they wanted the gospel of equity to take over. So when we come to Martin Luther King Day, we need to remember the message that he gave about colorblindness and about equality. And remember that we are moving at breakneck speed into a culture and a world of equity, not equality. Martin Luther King is a hero for what he went through and what he accomplished. He was not perfect. He had a lot of flaws. But his message was right. And I only wish those that claim to be civil rights leaders today would go back to his message. Get rid of the gospel of equity and DEI and hold fast to the constitutional principles of equality. Thanks for listening.